Right now, as you are watching this, meteorologists across Europe are still adding up the toll from the third heat dome to lock onto the continent this summer alone, and the running estimated death count has already climbed past 9,900 people, a number that keeps getting revised upward as more data comes in. The Netherlands just confirmed something its National Weather Service has only recorded 4 times since 1991. Germany broke its all-time national heat record on 3 consecutive days. Spain hit 45.1 degrees Celsius in Andalusia. And Britain just became the first year in its entire weather record to hit 35 degrees Celsius in May, June, and July, 3 separate months back to back to back. This is the story of Europe's 2026 heat dome summer, and why the atmospheric pattern behind it has scientists comparing it to something they say they have only genuinely observed unfold like this one time before, back in 2018 and 2019, when a Columbia University climate scientist looked at the same signature returning and said, and I am quoting him directly here, "It gives me the chills to see this evolving in real time again." No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data says and why it matters. Drop a comment and tell me how hot it has actually been where you live. This summer, I read every one of these. If you want grounded climate coverage instead of panic headlines, subscribe. It is free and a like helps this reach more people before the next heat dome forms. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now let us get into it. This story does not start in July. It starts on the 22nd of May, when a dome of high pressure settled over Western Europe and immediately started breaking records nobody expected to see broken that early in the year. France's national average hit 24.9 degrees Celsius on the 26th of May, its hottest May day on record. Ireland recorded its highest May temperature ever, with 2 separate towns hitting 28.8 degrees Celsius, beating a record that had stood since 1997. 7 people died from the heat in France alone during that first wave. Meteorologists called it, in the words of CNN report, mind-bogglingly crazy for how early in the year it arrived. That was Wave 1. Nobody realized yet that it was the first of 3. Wave 2 arrived around the 20th of June, and this is the one that broke the continent open. A dome of high pressure parked over Europe and simply refused to move. Day after day it dragged superheated air north off the Sahara Desert, and temperatures ran 14 to 18 degrees Celsius above normal for late June, from Portugal all the way to Poland. On the 22nd of June, the thermometer hit 45.1 degrees Celsius at Andújar in southern Spain, the single highest T reading of the entire event. 2 days later, on the 24th of June, France recorded its hottest day ever measured by nationwide average temperature, a record that has existed since 1947, while the town of Pissos hit 44.3 degrees Celsius. On the 26th of June, the United Kingdom's Met Office confirmed 37.3 degrees Celsius at Santon Downham in Suffolk, the hottest June day the country has ever recorded, beating a mark from 1976 that had stood for 50 years. The UK broke its own June record 3 days in a row. On the 27th, Denmark reached 36.6 degrees Celsius north of Odense, a provisional all-time national record in a series of measurements that stretches back to 1874. On the 28th, Germany's National Weather Service, the DWD, confirmed 41.7 degrees Celsius at Kaszin on the eastern border with Poland, breaking the country's previous all-time record of 41.2 degrees Celsius, which had only been set in 2019. Switzerland hit 38 degrees Celsius in Basel, breaking a record of 36.9 degrees Celsius that had stood for roughly 80 years. Hungary set a new national heat record of 42 degrees Celsius at Székely on the 30th of June. By the time the second wave finished sliding east across the continent, at least 13 European countries had broken national or monthly heat records, and researchers cited by the Washington Post were calling it the worst heat wave ever recorded on the continent. And then, instead of breaking down the way heat waves usually do, the pattern reloaded a third time. By the 7th of July, forecasters were already tracking a fresh ridge of high pressure rebuilding over Western Europe. And by the 10th of July, it had locked in again, pushing the Iberian Peninsula back into the low to mid-40s in degrees Celsius and keeping France, Germany, the Alps, and the Benelux countries under renewed extreme heat warnings. Taiwan, if you're wondering, is not involved in this one. This one stayed entirely European. The UK's Met Office confirmed this became the country's 3rd heat wave of the summer, peaking around the 10th to the 12th of July. And by the time IT eased, the UK had logged a record 8 separate days above 34 degrees Celsius in 2026, more than the totals recorded in 1976 and in 2020 combined into 1 year, and had become the first year in the entire UK weather record to reach 35 degrees Celsius in 3 consecutive months, May, June, and July. Meanwhile, the Netherlands confirmed something even more specific. Its National Meteorological Service, the KNMI, issued the maximum warning on its 10-point heat force scale, level 10, for only the fourth time since the scale was introduced in 1991, as the country logged what officials are calling its first ever superheat wave, defined as 3 consecutive days above 35 degrees Celsius. Behind every one of those numbers is a human cost that is still being counted. Spain alone reported more than 100 heat-related deaths as the second wave built. France linked a string of deaths to the heat, including dozens of drownings as people sought relief in rivers, lakes, and the sea, and the country placed 49 of its 96 mainland departments under its highest possible heat alert, closing or shortening hours at hundreds of schools. As the 3 waves stacked on top of each other through May, June, and July, the running estimated death toll across Europe climbed past 9,900 people, a figure drawn from early attribution and excess mortality modeling that, like every heatwave death toll in history, will almost certainly be revised upward for months as the full data comes in. The World Health Organization went further and called the broader pattern a health emergency, noting that heat has killed an estimated 200,000 people across Europe over just the past 4 years. Now let us talk about why this kept happening 3 separate times in one summer, because this is the part scientists are actually worried about, more than any single temperature record. The engine behind all 3 waves was the same thing every time, something called a heat dome, a large, stubborn zone of high pressure that acts like a lid, trapping hot air underneath it and letting the sun bake it hotter day after day with nowhere for it to escape. What kept that lid in place for weeks at a stretch was a pattern called an omega block, named because on a weather map, the jet stream bends into a shape that literally looks like the Greek letter omega, a hump flanked by 2 dips. Once that shape locks in, it can stall an entire continent's weather for a week or more. But the deeper mechanism, the one climate scientists specifically flagged in a 2022 study published in the journal Nature Communications, is something called a double jet state. Normally there is one jet stream, one fast ribbon of wind about 10 kilometers above the surface, steering weather systems from west to east. In a double jet state, that ribbon splits into 2 separate branches, one over southern Eurasia and one over northern Eurasia, and the storm systems that would normally sweep in off the Atlantic and cool Western Europe down get diverted north along the upper branch instead, leaving the continent sitting under clear skies and direct sun with nothing to interrupt it. The lead researchers behind that study, Effie Rousey, Kai Kornhuber, and Im Kumu, found that the number of double jet events per year has not actually changed much over the past 40 years of data. What has changed is how long each one lasts once it forms. That increased persistence on its own explains almost 100% of the accelerated heatwave trend, specifically in Western Europe, and about 30% of the trend across the wider continent, according to their published findings. There's a further layer to why the wave gets locked in place so effectively, something atmospheric scientists call quasi-resonant amplification. Large-scale waves in the jet stream at specific wave numbers, 6, 7, and 8, meaning 6 to 8 full wave crests wrapped around the hemisphere at once, can occasionally get trapped inside a kind of atmospheric corridor instead of moving eastward and dissipating the way they normally would. When that trapping happens, the wave stops traveling and simply sits there, locked in place for days or weeks, which is exactly what allows a heat dome to stall over one region instead of drifting past in a few days like a normal warm spell. Here is the comparison to 2018 and 2019 that this video opened with. Kai Kornhuber, the same scientist behind that double jet research, was watching this exact wavy jet stream pattern return to Europe for a second consecutive year back in 2019. And at the time, he told reporters that a wavier than normal jet stream returning for a second year running had never been formally observed before. That was the first time. He said he would not have expected that situation to come back so quickly after the extreme summer before it, and that watching it evolve again in real time gave him, in his words, the chills. 2026 is the pattern doing something even more extreme than that. Instead of returning for a second consecutive year, the same double jet, Omega Block signature, reloaded 3 separate times within a single season, in May, in June, and again in July, something researchers studying this exact mechanism say matches the kind of repeated locking behavior they have only genuinely documented playing out like this one other time in the decades of data behind their models. None of this is happening in isolation from the ocean either. The European Union's Copernicus Marine Service confirmed that the Mediterranean Sea's average surface temperature from January through June of this year reached 18.07 degrees Celsius, making the first half of 2026 the 3rd warmest on record for the Mediterranean, behind only 2024 and 2025. Globally, sea surface temperatures for the first 6 months of the year averaged 20.94 degrees Celsius, the second warmest opening half of any year on record, with marine heat waves covering roughly 82% of the entire global ocean by the middle of the year. June of 2026 recorded the highest June sea surface temperature ever measured for the world's ice-free oceans, narrowly beating the previous record set in 2024. And scientists at Copernicus attributed part of that spike to a strengthening El Niño event developing at the same time in the Pacific. Warmer oceans do not force a heat dome to form on any given day. Wind shear and atmospheric structure still decide that. What a warmer ocean does is raise the baseline amount of heat sitting in the system for a heat dome to draw on whenever the atmospheric conditions do line up, which is precisely why the same double jet mechanism scientists first flagged as remarkable in 2019 is now producing something even more extreme just 7 years later. So what does this actually mean if you live anywhere in Western Europe? It does not. Specific atmospheric fingerprint behind that reload, a persistent double jet locked in place by quasi-resonant amplification, is a pattern scientists have watched become measurably more common and more durable over the past 4 decades of data. In 2026 is the clearest real-world case yet of what happens when that fingerprint shows up not once, but 3 times in a single season. An analysis of the event covered by CNN concluded that a heat wave of this intensity would have been, in the analysts' own words, virtually impossible just a few decades ago without human-caused warming. So here is the honest, grounded summary. Europe's 2026 summer produced 3 separate heat domes in May, June, and July, driven every time by the same double jet omega block signature that locked the jet stream in place and cut Western Europe off from the cooling Atlantic air that would normally interrupt it. It broke national all-time records in Germany and Denmark, broke a 50-year-old June record in the United Kingdom 3 days running, pushed Spain to 45.1 degrees Celsius, and gave the Netherlands its first ever superheat wave and only its 4th ever level 10 heat warning since 1991. Across all 3 waves combined, the estimated death toll has climbed past 9,900 people and is still rising. And the underlying mechanism behind it, a wavy, double-branched jet stream locking into place once before in 2019 and called something that gave him the chills. 2026 just showed what that same signature looks like when it comes back stronger and 3 times in one summer instead of once. We will keep tracking this the same way we did today, straight from the WMO, the Met Office, DWD, Météo France, EMET, KNMI, and Copernicus, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one forming, because if the pattern behind this holds, it may not take long. And leave that comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and how this summer has actually felt on the ground where you live. Because behind every one of these numbers is a family in Andalusia with the shutters closed at noon, a school in France that closed its doors early to keep children out of the heat, and a farmer in the Netherlands watching a heat warning scale hit its maximum level for only the 4th time in 35 years. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.